Swalele, and today I want to share my work. This is part of my PhD work on using AI or deep learning and remote sensing images to detect and track land use following deforestation at the Pantropical scale. And of course, I've highlighted some of the words at the title, and because I just want to explain a bit more on this before I dive deep into detail. So basically, this title has these main three ingredients: so deep learning, remote sensing, and land use following deforestation. And starting by remote sensing, this it just means looking at the Earth from above. This can be either by satellite, balloon, airplane, or by drones. And using these tools, you can get images of any space on the planet. And the second is land use following deforestation, or you can also call it deforestation drivers. In this case, these just mean human activities which are contributing to deforestation. So when you have a forest and human activities contribute to that forest being lost, then we say that, and what follows after that activity is what we call land use after deforestation, or a driver of deforestation. And lastly is the deep learning, which means this basically just an automated image understanding by using computer algorithm. For example, in this case, with a computer, you can just ask a computer to tell you what kind of activities which has caused deforestation, which is existing after deforestation, and it will tell you, for example, in this case here, it's large-scale cropland. So before going further, of course, I just want to remind of why it's important to monitor forests, because forests are important because they are home to millions of tree species, but also to varieties of animals. We get food from forest. We depend a lot of energy, especially at the Pantropical. We get firewood from the forest to use for cooking, and of course for many different activities at our homes. But also in forests, we conserve water. So water from the forest are more clean, but also in terms of storage capacity, but also in terms of reducing erosion. That service provided by the presence of trees and forest. And also we enjoy forests when we do research as scientists, but also when we go for hiking, just for relaxation, we go to the forest and just enjoy nature. That's how forests important are. And if we miss this forest, I don't know how life would be. However, the trend of forests over the years has been at a decreasing rate. So this is data from basically Hansen forest source data, where it's the data from 2001 to 2020, and you can see that the trend of forest loss has been increasing over time. So in case if this trend go without being reduced or kind of managed, it means over time the amount of forest will be really reduced, and some part of our planet has really been in serious trouble because of how the effect of climate change, but also flooding, because water are not coming from the rain. They are not really protected in places where we have forest. And as I said, among the activities causing deforestation, mainly at large part is agriculture. Here we call it cropland expansion, and this can be basically large scale or small scale. And large scale meaning for business purpose investment, and but also small scale. But also we have commodity crop like cacao, cashew, oil palm, rubber, coffee, tea plantations establishment. But also we have pasture where we use them to raise animals, of course, for beef, and but also roads in terms of this can be construction for development, but also for logging activities inside the forest areas. But also we have mining activities, which takes place in different parts or at least at a pantropical scale. Thus, several initiatives have been taken to reduce this impact of these activities. So, for example, now there is this EU deforestation free supply chain regulation, which is aiming at least to curb the effect. So, dealing with companies who are responsible probably to bring products related to commodity crops to countries which like, for example, from the global south maybe to Europe, and try to make these companies accountable so that people are using products which are not associated with deforestation. But also there is acts like, for example, the UK Environmental Act, also from like states like California, but also New York. However, this initiative, they cannot really function if we don't have information and data to be able to support its implementation. So, for example, of course, you can have information about deforestation, but if you don't know what kind of activities are causing this kind of deforestation, then it's so difficult to be able to track and monitor. Of course, the whole process kind of supply chain you need also to have other information about where these commodities are going. So not only like remote sensing, but you also can need some additional information of how this whole supply chain of commodity crops is causing deforestation. However, for we as remote sensing scientists, you can really help in terms of trying to identify deforestation when it's happening. So first you have a satellite image. When there is a forest, you know there is a forest. If there is deforestation taking place, you can be able to detect it and monitor it. But also you can also try to identify what kind of activities which caused deforestation. And if it's maybe, for example, cacao or rubber or another activities, you can really identify it and try to track to people who are responsible for causing such kind of act and probably be able to take action. That's why in our work we try to do that to try to come up with solutions where we can be able to give information about these land use activities which are taking place. Currently, there are data sets of drivers or land use for deforestation. However, they are available at sample based. So, for example, most of the work which has been done using visual interpretation. So you have a satellite image and expert trying to go to interpret what kind of activities are taking place based on those patches of land. And this does not cover the whole area because, like, for example, here you have like deforestation happening almost every part of the forest. And by only using visual interpretation, it's so difficult to be able to do what we're meaning that to identify every place. So this sample base can work at a very regional level, but at a very local level, you might meet some places, or you might also meet some kind of drivers of this deforestation. And for our approach, we aim to use deep learning instead of using visual interpretation by human expert to identify the land use of a very large scale, and for every at risk pixel where deforestation is happening, to try to assign a label to where conversion are taking place and know what kind of activities are causing this deforestation. However, you might think that's a very easy job. So, for example, here I have this patch of land where there was a forest and there was deforestation, which happened later on. Of course, you might be able to say this is maybe a large-scale cropland. However, if you have many land uses and many patches, maybe millions of patches, it becomes even difficult. So, for example, here we have another patch, another one. I will just show a few patches of different kind of drivers where deforestation happened, and then you have a land use. So as you can see, even for humans, it becomes a bit of expert with only remote sensing images to be able to identify it. So this way, we only have 6. Imagine if you have more and you have from different environments, it becomes a very challenging task, even for human to be able to do that. However, with deep learning or AI, it can train it to be able to at least help to do this task. So, for example, here you have an image where there was a forest and deforestation happened, and we asked the deep learning model to tell us what kind of land use activities are taking place in this image, and we were able to predict, okay, here you have this image, you have large-scale cropland and pasture. So we can really know where we have, for example, pasture and we have large-scale cropland, and we can take action based on that. So going back to the previous example I showed you, we also able to use the planning to tell us what kind of land use happening, and it was able to tell us, okay, this indeed was large-scale cropland, so similar to what we interpreted with human expert, and this was cacao, and this image, of course, is from Ghana, and this is oil palm, and this was tea plantation, and this is rubber, and this is cashew. So the good thing is, like when you have a model which is trained or with AI, that and if it performs better, that you can do this work more faster and over a larger area, so that it minimizes the amount of work which human might be able to do using only visual interpretation. So important question which we had to ask ourselves, that how can we use deep learning for assessing land use for deforestation using remote sensing data, and how can this method be applied to analyze land use for deforestation in different national and regional context. So not only being at a very small scale, but also at a very regional or national context, so that they can be operationalized and be used for implementation and probably also for policy making. And lastly, because one of the challenges, at least in the global south we have, is that there is limited availability of data to train deep learning algorithms. So with data we have, they're so scattered, they're few but also scattered. So one question was, how can we leverage this kind of data set, or whether small or few they're existing, to kind of try to increase the thematic detail and try to identify this land use after deforestation. One important aspect to consider when dealing with land use is that it's not like land cover, where you just have probably dictator signature, try to identify what kind of land cover it is. Land use is dynamic in terms of spatial, but also temporal aspect. So it varies over time and space. So when trying to identify the land use, you need kind of to take into account all of those important aspects in terms of spatial and temporal. And I did one of my study. This is the paper where I published. I tried to assess this by, of course, trying to combine different model which has both spatial and temporal characteristics to try to drive the land use for deforestation. And I derived 6 methods. So 4 methods were based on having spatial temporal aspect, and 2 models. One was having only temporal, so kind of only learning temporal characteristics of the data, and one which only exhibited like a spatial aspect of the data. And I used the data which were available from FAO, and they were refined by a colleague at Wageningen to improve their thematic detail. And in general, we thought we had like 6 land use classes which we trained for and tried to identify. So these were visually interpreted, and for this case study, we tried to see if deep learning algorithm can do the same job as the one which human has already implemented. And from our analysis, so the model developed where, of course, we had 4 types of model based on continent. So here you can see, and also the one model which is basically cover the whole data across the pantropics. And what we're trying to see that if how can the model performs if you have a model at all pantropical scale, and also if you have a model at continental scale. And as you can see from these results, is that the model trained at only pantropical scale tend to perform to have less accuracy compared to model which is trained at continental scale. But also we saw that the spatial temporal models were able to achieve higher accuracy compared to model which only use temporal characteristics and the spatial characteristics of the data. So this was the first kind of study, kind of exploratory, trying to understand how useful deep learning can be in compared to human. And you can see that more than 80% of the land use which are identified by human will also be able to identify by the deep learning model. So we went ahead to apply the model to at country scale. So this was kind of going from samples, so testing how the model performs, to the application. And we did this in Ethiopia, where we derived 11 land use classes, and we used planetinic data to train this model, but also Landsat in comparison. So we had planet data, and we also compared with Landsat and Sentinel, just to see how these different kind of data sets perform. And we derived the land use classes from forest loss, which occurred between the year 2010 to 2014. And from analysis, we were able to see that data which from planet were able to perform much better. If you see here at the end, like the micro average F1 score, planet data, they achieved higher F1 score compared to Sentinel and Landsat data. Of course, this is because they have more spatial, more high resolution compared to these other two types of data set. And we, apart from that, we are able to derive the map, so apply throughout the whole country and also assess the accuracy of the results, and we're able to achieve an accuracy of around 80%. I will probably share here. I have an app where it's a GE map, and you can really go through the app and see the output map which we produced, and also see different where the location of different types of land uses for deforestation in Ethiopia based on regions, but also at a national scale. So apart from Ethiopia, we also went ahead to try to do in Ivory Coast. So Ivory Coast, it's kind of different from Ethiopia. So where you have more of, for example, commodity crops like cacao, but also rubber, oil palm, but also cashew. And it contributes, I think, largely to most of the commodity crop which are being exported from Africa. So one thing we did here, first we tried to identify deforestation. So we used an algorithm from a colleague here in Wageningen, where you do identify deforestation, and then you also identify in all areas where there is deforestation, you try to identify if there is a regrowth. And then after you have regrowth, you try to identify what kind of land use in that area where there was deforestation. And we did this, we identified 9 land use classes, and we used the model. So the model I explained before from Ethiopia, we fine-tuned it, so kind of doing the transfer learning to Ivory Coast. And we used planetary images from the year 2020 to 2022. And we created a model, and we produced the map, and also we assessed the map based on independent data which we obtained from ICLAF. And the accuracy obtained, as you can see, were around 79%. Of course, a bit less than Ethiopia, but I think 79% is still the high accuracy. Compared to that, you have a lot of commodity crops in in Cote d'Ivoire compared to Ethiopia. And we also produced a map, so a word war map. And as you can see from this map, we're able to see that if you see in the cyan color, you have a lot. This is cacao. So like cacao is mostly in the south. You can, and cashew is mostly in the northern part of Ivory Coast. And you can also see that most of the commodity crops such as oil palm and rubber are in the very southern part of the country. And so also we have these polygons, which with black boundaries. These are forest classes, so defined as forestry of course by the government. And as you can see, also very few in green that are the forests concept like protected forest areas where you still have forest in it. So most of the forests, they are kind of gone. So for example, you can see a lot of forest in cyan, which is really like completely covered with cacao. And also in the north, you can also, of course, you have small scale agriculture, but also cashew. So you can see how important it is to do this work word to war. And it's so difficult if you only do it with visual interpretation. So you can really get a picture of what is happening on the ground. And if you have very high resolution image, you can even go at patch level and try to identify at field level what is happening. So apart from that, we also went ahead. So as I said previously, that also to try to leverage. So here we wanted to map the land use at continental scale, so for the entire of Africa. And what we did, the challenge was to get data which is really harmonized, collected in the similar way, and probably data ready for deep learning application. However, that is really challenging. So we're trying just to grab data which is available from any source we were able to get, and try to use those data for developing deep learning algorithm to try to identify the land use for deforestation at the continental scale. And as you can see, also the distribution kind of the X is kind of how many data set you have for each data, and you can see most of them like large scale crop and probably small scale crop is the majority, and some of the quantity crop they're really lacking. And of course, most of these, for example, in countries like Ivory Coast or Ghana, is where you can get data for like commodity crop. In some countries, is really challenging. But we developed a process of how to do that, and I will explain a bit later. So first, just to go on, we used still planet data because we wanted to match throughout the process to try to see if this really works to map that. And we also used Janssen forest loss as the reference for deforestation, which has happened in Africa. But and also we identify 15 land use classes, and we to do this work, of course, we use the attention unit model, but also active learning process to do the mapping. And the output was a word-to-word map of the land use for deforestation for African continent, but also the hotspot of land uses. So just to go a bit of how we did it. So basically, normally you train, when you have data, you just get a model and they train and you get the results. However, because we had data which are really sparsely, some of them very few, some of them very sparsely located, only in one countries, in some other country did not have. So we use active learning where we try to use the data we have and also try to have samples of data where we don't have label to try to improve the performance of the model. So it's kind of a human work together with the model. And using this, we were able to improve the performance and accuracy of the model. Initially, we just add the data and trained. We obtained the accuracy of around 43. but through iterative active learning, so interaction of the deep learning model with human, we're able to improve the accuracy to 84% from, that's kind of like half of the accuracy of initial performance of the model. So in this case, we were able really to prove that, okay, so this means that indeed you can really do this work at a very large scale, regardless of the amount of data you have, only if you have human involved. So not only just to wait until you have a lot of data, even if you have very few data, you can still use those data with humans. So kind of the model help you to label extra data and add those data to the model, and then in the end improve the performance of the model. And we went ahead and do the mapping for the entire continent, of course, using planetary data. And here, as you can see, you have location of, for example, in science here you have, of course, cocoa in West Africa, commodity crops, but you can also see mining along the rivers. You can also see cashew along the southern of like Tanzania and the northern Mozambique. And you can also you have also like large scale cropland, more dominant like in Zambia, and also small scale in Pato between Tanzania and DRC. We also managed to only after having those results, we also managed to identify where are the hotspots. And here you can see like hotspots of different land uses. And for each land use, you can see that most of the commodity crops are located in Western Africa. So, and also you can see that, for example, large scale cropland, indeed, you can see Zambia and of course Nigeria, but also you can see a lot of roads, for example, in DRC and along like making kind of an arc to West Africa. And I just wanted to show you a bit like, okay, here I have an app and which of the results, it's kind of the visual analysis. So these are the results were obtained from the prediction. You can, so for example here, by zooming in from different location, this is basically in Ghana where you have in dark, where you have like forests. You can see some patch of forest, and in those areas where deforestation happened, and you can see that you have a lot of amount of cocoa, but also you have like oil palm and other kind of land uses. And similarly in Ivory Coast, where you have, for example, this is like a forest, conserved forest is called Sandra, was really converted to cocoa, small-scale cocoa cocoa farms. And we also have like this cashew around the border between Tanzania and Mozambique, like a lot of cashew activities going on there. And also this is like in Zambia, a lot of large-scale cropland, but you can also see the pattern that whenever there is large-scale cropland at the side, so at the side of these large-scale cropland, you also have small-scale cropland. So it meaning that they go hand in hand. But also in DRC, you have like a lot of like, of course, small-scale cropland as a leading driver of deforestation. And of course, you can also see some chunks of oil palm in between them. So this is basically for visualization, and of course, can just take time to see it and enjoy it and see what kind of driver is taking place in different parts of the continent. But also we have, for example, in South Africa here, it's kind of a dry land. So this is in dry land where you have like expansion for large scale cropland, but also similarly in South Africa, we have a lot of plantation forests which are existing. Of course, this is not deforestation, basically. So from our analysis, because we use data from Hansen forest loss, what happened is that because plantation forests are planted in kind of cycle, rotational, so whenever there is like harvest is done, they kind of cut down the trees and then plant again. Of course, when you have like a deforestation algorithm, you're going to detect them. So this, in terms of definition, we just put it because we didn't want to classify. We didn't want to classify it as a separate land use. We still want to have it, but I think in most cases this is kind of not deforestation, but it's basically based on management perspective. Yeah, so you can even see like a lot of deforestation happening in dry forest, which is probably in parts which are not like touched a bit. But with this data set, we try to map not only the humid forest, but also the dry forest. So in conclusion, from this work, you can see that we really can be able to use deep learning, remote sensing, to complement the work which is existing for human effort. So in case you have an effort to identify land use using visual interpretation, you can complement that with deep learning to make the process go faster and also do it at a very large scale. As I said, also, I saw that continental models, so working a bit at a local scale, so not having a model which works probably at a pantropical level, but only maybe focus at the continental level, performed a bit much better compared to if you just apply one model over a global scale. And also, we were able to increase. So the data we used planet, meaning that we were able to map each pixel at 5-meter resolution. So that's very detailed data and can be used not only at global, at maybe at national scale for decision making, but it can also be used at regional or even at local scale or even at the district scale for decision making purposes. And this work, of course, was done in cloud in computing infrastructure by SEPA, which is a platform from FAO, and it's freely available for country to use. So meaning that you can really produce this work at a country scale to be able to track these drivers over time. So not only at one time step, but you can do this process over time. And lastly, given the current legislation on deforestation-related commodity crops, so like legislation trying to monitor the importation of deforestation-free products to different countries, like for example in Europe, UK, and the US, this data become very useful in terms of trying to help not only companies but also institutions responsible for tracking a different kind of drivers, but also making probably a company who are responsible for different kind of trade in different commodity crop. So thank you. That will be the end of my presentation.
Wow, thank you so much. That was a lot and a lot of great work. Yeah, I'm gonna open the floor for question. Phoebe, I saw your hand up. If you wanna go first.
Yeah.
I think mine was more of a clap, but now that I have the podium, I will ask, why is it that the pantropical results are too far off compared to the global one? I would expect the reverse to be true.
You mean in terms of performance, right?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So one thing we did is that with the global, you have this heterogeneity. So, for example, if you have pasture, like data set of pasture, for example, pasture in, say, in South America, the way it's implemented, you have this land clearing where you have this very smooth landscape with very few trees, and you can really identify this is a pasture land. But if, for example, if you come in Africa, it's really different. Most of the pasture activities, they are kind of mixed with farming, but also sometimes you have this grazing in dry forest or in forest. What you can use is basically you have this track of roads to try to give you an idea what kind of land. So this kind of heterogeneity makes a bit of different in terms of how land practice is done, but also I think the environmental conditions. So in terms of seasonality, spatial differences of land use practice make it very challenging if you have a pantropical model compared to if you have only a continental model or even a country model, because with a country or continental model, you tend to minimize those kind of heterogeneity in your model.
Okay, I hope that helps. I see Glory, you have your hand up, and then Jacob.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Robert, for your presentation. I'm sorry that I couldn't join early, but it was really nice to see that you are working on land use classification. So when you said land use following deforestation, does it mean it will only work if there's deforestation?
Yes. Hi, Glory. Thank you for your question. Yes. So the idea here is to make a follow-up of what follows after deforestation. So basically, only like land uses which follow, because this is kind of has a very different dynamic. So you have kind of a growth, like a transition, of course, over time. So like different if you have a land use which existed over a long time. Land use after deforestation has this kind of transition where you have deforestation and then there is an establishment. And of course, this is important because we want to really assign labels, not only to deforestation. So you have deforestation, but we also want to assign what causes kind of what that deforestation. And I think that's a very good step in terms of monitoring, but also decision making.
Right, thanks.
Yeah.
I see. So if I'm, for instance, interested in mining detection in Ghana, so do you think I can use the map that you have showed to, let's say, identify those areas where there is mining or land use after deforestation in Ghana? Whatever happened, whether it is crop or other type of human being activities.
Yes. So with this map, you can really take to identify where there is deforestation. If there is mining, then you can see indeed after deforestation, mining happened. So mining was the cause of that deforestation.
So can I use my area of interest to extract those area, or is it? Do we have it online? Can you share the link with us, please? Whether it is the link to the map or even the link to the code, if possible, if it is open source, of course.
Yeah. So this work is this work for continental Africa is still under review. Of course, you just recently submitted to work. But if you need, I can share with you the map, but also the code of area of interest. And I would expect probably in 2 or 3 months it will be published.
Okay, great. So in the meantime, please can you share the map? I will be really
sure. Yeah, the app was showing there. Yeah, I can share. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Jacob, you want to go?
Thank you, and thank you, Robert. This is a really interesting presentation. I was wondering, you said that it takes temporal information into account. How long after the deforestation event is the data, like temporally, are you looking at it? Is it just like a year after or 5 years after? Because I was wondering for things like oil palm, where the actual plantation won't be visible until, maybe 5 to 8 years after the planting. I was wondering how that works.
Thank you, Jacob. I think that's a very nice, good question. So the challenges, of course, we're facing in that, indeed, it was because, I mean, the timing of these different land uses is really important to be able to identify them. So, for example, if you take these commented crops, not only oil palm, but also cocoa or cashew, to be able to identify them, it needs a bit of time. So, indeed, for especially for commodity crops like oil palm, rubber, cocoa, if you have only like 2 years, 1 year or 2 years, it's become a bit of challenging. So you get a lot of confusion in trying to identify them. So we have like a lot of uncertainty in those areas where the crops is still young. So basically, if it's really you have only 1 year, most of it will be probably be predicted as a large scale cropland instead of the commodity crop. So it needs time. However, we are still working on finding. So because now in the literature, it's not like really scientific, illustrated that what time is best for which kind of commodity crop to be able to detect. We are trying to test that and to really come up with a really number that maybe after what year you can really be able to say I can detect oil palm. And in this case, not only because it's easier, for example, if you're only trying to identify oil palm, it can be easier. But if you're trying to identify, for example, oil palm and lava and like many at the same time, so the confusion can really happen. But if I think we're able to identify what time range is good to do that, I think that would be a very big step. So I think we're still working on that.
Yeah, I think that would definitely be a great contribution. Thank you. Yeah, I was wondering, so if your study period, I forgot, maybe it was like 2000 through 2020, does that mean you're kind of more confident in the earlier deforestation events than the later ones?
Yes, so we have some kind of confidence. So the confidence, of course, especially the last three years, you have less confidence in terms of the land uses, because especially for not all, but especially for these commodity crops.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Africa, I see you have your hands up.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Robert. That's great work and very pertinent. My question was actually along the lines of Jacob, of the timing, and along the lines also for operational purposes. If you have had the chance, I know this is very new, of working with the local stakeholders in terms of applying this type of detection of drivers of deforestation. Because let's say it's just a scenario in which we have a deforestation alert system and we want to add this information. So every time we have an alert, we can have some source of knowledge of what caused that deforestation. What is the minimal timing that will be needed to have that information at an accurate level?
Thank you.
So I think there are two questions. If you have tested it on the ground with a stakeholder, and then the minimal timing needed.
Yeah. So on my work on Ethiopia, of course, I worked with like throughout the work, because it was a project, and we worked with experts from Ethiopia, and of course, because the challenge was mostly on coffee, and what we discovered that with coffee, because for example in Ethiopia it's kind of different, it's mostly planted under canopy, and you can really detect it easily during like initial years because of the pattern of how it's established, and because after time the canopy grows and you can really not be able to detect. So that was just one case. For the question of operationalization, I think one aspect would be to have really at a very near real time. So like with the alerts, only classes which can be really identified at a very short period of time. So, for example, I know, like for example, mining or roads, or for example, fire, which are kind of they can easily be identified. But if you go, like for example, for commodity crops, I think that still needs some time to be able to tell, like, if it's really these commodity crops. However, I think for this kind of analysis, you can always have an operational system where you can have this kind of updated drivers, but also maybe after a year or two, you also have information about probably all these other kind of land use activities, like commodity crops.
That's great, and thank you so much. And yeah, makes a lot of sense. And just a comment, a quick comment. When you were listing different data sets they were collecting for Africa, just want to mention that RCMRD has several land cover data sets available for Eastern and Southern Africa. And maybe I see that Edward also wrote in the chat to share your contact, and Phoebe is also here, can comment more about the different data that they have created for the region.
Oh, thank you. I think that's will be really because the challenge, I think, which is allowing is like having this data for like acquiring like reference data to be able to train, and probably because with deep learning, mostly when you have more data, the better, and also the way the data are available not in the format which probably fits for deep learning application. So I think thank you for this. I think I will maybe contact. So it's Phoebe and.
Yes, Phoebe.
Okay, Phoebe, yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Africa. Jacob, I have a question before I hand it off to you. Is that okay? Okay. Yeah, so thanks, Robert, for your presentation. On slide 18, when you were talking about transfer learning between different national models, you also briefly talked about how that works with different kind of classes that may exist in different countries. Can you also explain a little bit on that? And if someone were to take your model, for example, not just the national model, but Pantropical model, and use that in other region, how would that affect? If there is no class available, do they need to go and annotate those data and transfer on the existing model, or how that works? Probably more on the line what Africa was asking on operational side of things.
Yeah, thank you for that. So basically, as you can see, for example, we didn't have coffee class, which was in Ethiopia, was not in Ivory Coast. So what you change, you want to have in your model, in your pre-existing model, is the weights. So the kind of information already trained weight, not starting from scratch, but starting from somewhere. You don't really need to have the same classes, and you don't have to define. So even the number of classes you can change. So you can, for example, initially, if you have 10 classes, you can still use the same model to train in your new area where you have maybe 5 classes.
Okay, I see. And then you're just assigning random weights to the non-existent classes.
Yeah. So the important is that the model is already learned. So it's something which it's kind of had a brain already to identify something, not really starting.
Okay.
It's like you have kids who is like starting to talk, but this is already like you already learned, so it kind of adapt from the previous knowledge in order to differentiate the new data it has. Yeah.
Okay. One last question I have is on the attention unit, the active learning portion. So there's a lot of literature that points to sampling bias or strategy bias on those active learning process. Can you explain a little bit on how you are controlling those biases, making sure that the sampling that the model is choosing it's not just random, or it's not on the edges where it sees a lot of artifact between jumping from one class to another? So those kind of small nuances, is there any kind of techniques that you're applying to control those? And yeah.
So for our case, we applied this activity because we didn't have data, like legally annotated data in some of the areas. So for example, we had cashew data only from Cote d'Ivoire. And what we wanted to do is also to so the model is performing better in those areas where you have data. So, and in areas where you don't have data, so when you move from one geography to the other, the model really does not perform well. So I wanted the model to help us understand where the performance does not perform, because you already know in areas where we have data, it does good. So the only next step where we use active learning is try to test it in areas where we know there's this kind of land use, but or we have maybe based on sample point, but we don't have really annotation on those areas, data which is ready for training a deep learning model. And through that process, we're able to kind of know in which areas probably we need to gain more samples and probably try to improve their performance of the model.
I see. So it's more of trying to understand where there is a problem with the model itself and then doing sampling later on.
Yes, yeah.
Gotcha.
But yeah.
Okay, that
so
makes
of course
sense.
letting the model kind of drive you where it's
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Jacob?
I could probably just follow up with an email, perhaps. I think the meeting's about to end in a minute or so, but I was wondering if Robert could share his slides from today, maybe through you, Biplav, so we could all check out his applications and publications and look into it, because it's very interesting stuff. Thanks again.
Yeah, I'll send a follow-up email with all the materials. All right. Thank you so much, Robert, for this great presentation. I think we're just on time, and hopefully we'll be able to collaborate more in the future. And thanks so much, Africa, for connecting Robert with us.
Yeah, indeed. I'm looking forward to that. I think that will be a very good step to try at least to go, not only in Africa, but probably also in some other parts.